what is IAC basically? So in this class, we'll look at fundamentals and the benefits of using IAC. Um, basically you see CloudFormation, which is the AWS native tool, right? For you to do IAC. We'll see what Infrastructure Composer is, which is more or less like, AWS will try to babysit you and give you things that if you want to go the hard way, there's a tool for you. But if you also want to go the easy way, there is a tool for you. Okay. We'll look at change sets, what that looks like. And then we'll talk about CDK, like AWS CDK itself. We'll talk about the best practices that are out there. And then we'll definitely do some demos so that you see what it looks like. So far, before now, even everything I've done till today, we've always done it via the console, right? Via the console, we always do it via the console. So manual infrastructure management is really what we've been doing. So every time you see yourself, you go to the console, you're creating, like even the hosted zone I created yesterday, I created it manually, right? Which is not a problem. If you have like one account, it's your own account, you have to create those things. It's easy. You can do that. But in the real world, like I've said, it's not one account. There's so many accounts, so many regions, right? So if you have to do that for more than one account, it becomes stressful. It becomes you can't reproduce it easily from one environment to the other environment, right? So it's time consuming. It's error prone because even if I tell you, I tell you go through this instruction. Sometimes you get it, but sometimes also you miss one step. Maybe the security group you put like a rule that's not supposed to be there. It won't work, right? So there is bound to be errors, right? There is bound to be things not being reproducible. Oh, it's working in my account. I did it in my account, but in your own case, you're trying to do it. You can't get it done, right? Also, no versioning, right? When you do it like that and you lose the change, what happens? Like, how do you go back to what it was before? And there's no audit. And you can't really tell who did what at some point because it's all obviously with CloudTrail you can do some things, right? But sometimes you really want to see how your infrastructure is progressing. Just the way code is, right? Code is version. Most people will not do software development these days without it being version. Meaning, we're in version 1, we'll move to version 2, but we can always go back to version 1 whenever, right? And that's what gives birth to IAC. So IAC is not new to the cloud. It's just basically we are trying to solve the problem on the left, right? So IAC is like declarative configuration files, meaning you're basically declaring, writing them as configuration files. What it means is that instead of me giving you instructions of how to do it, I can pass that file to you, right? I can send you the file, regardless of where you are in the world. If you have that file and you have the right permission, right, you can go to your account and click on that file and create it, right? So there are many things you can do on that file. You can more or less like put versioning on top of it, right? If you have Git like and you're collaborating with so many people, for example, you will see how that configuration file is growing over time, right? And you can revert, you can upgrade it, you can downgrade it, right? Good. So it means that all the things we were complaining about before, it becomes like automation becomes repeatable. That means you did it in one account, you don't have to do all those ClickUps again in another account. You can just basically go and launch the template and you're good to go, right? Version control is obviously there, consistent environment across stages. So what it means is that, yeah, it works here. If you take that same template somewhere else, it should work. It means those two environments become very consistent, right? Obviously, error reduction, no more manual errors. Oh, I did it. Oh, I think I used the wrong security group. That's why it didn't work, right? Now it's very clear on like how to get it. And that brings us to AWS. Like I mentioned, IAC is not new. IAC is a thing, right? So even if you're not in AWS, IAC is something you have to know as a cloud engineer or a DevOps engineer, right? But in AWS, they have a tool, and the tool is called CloudFormation, right? Native to AWS. So it's basically IAC as a service. Is what CloudFormation is, right? So it means, yeah, all the goodies that I just mentioned in the slide before now, it's all baked in, meaning declarative, right? You can pretty much decide the state of your infrastructure, right? And then just let the service take care of it for you, right? So template driven, meaning you have to write like a template. You have to say, it's like you're replacing the mindset of I want an EC2. Instead of you clicking, you're creating a template for it, right? And that becomes something that you can launch in your account or someone else's account. So obviously support several of the AWS services that are out there, right? Because that's the whole idea. You want to be able to provision EC2 instance, provision key, like a KMS keys, whatever you want to provision, S3 bucket, SNS topics. You want to do that, right? Without having to click the console. So yeah, obviously is a free service. So one thing you should take out of this call is that CloudFormation is free. You're not going to pay anything. It's just the service that you. So if you're deploying an EC2 machine from the CloudFormation template, for example, you're not going to pay for the CloudFormation service. You're only going to pay for the infrastructure that you provision, right? Cool. It's obviously the foundation of many things, right? Because yeah, that's where you start from. We've seen how manual doesn't work. You have to provision using IAC. Okay. I don't need to stay long on this slide, but if you want to read, it's here. It has a lot of benefit, right? All the benefit that we mentioned, why you should do IAC, is all what CloudFormation is going to give you. Because again, you're solving the same problem, but now in the cloud, right? So version control, meaning it's a template, right? Even if you're using S3, just applying S3 versioning alone to it, you've already added versioning because it's a file that will change from one version to the other, right? So it's good. Consistent environment, meaning if you try it, ideally most people would write an IAC, run it in dev. If it works well in dev, they promote it to production. So consistent, right? It means you can keep consistency between your environments. Automation also is one good thing here because now it's all in file. It's the file that is saying exactly what you want to do, which means you can just run that file or give it to anyone. So you can build a lot of automation on it. Say around this time, tear down the stack. Around this time, bring the stack up, right? You can't do that if it was manual, right? So that's another thing automation can do for you. Obviously, you can do cost control, dependency management, it's obviously automatically figured out for you, but you still can control that, right? With things like depends on, such that you can say, okay, I know this resource needs to be ready before I create this resource. So you can create that whole dependency, right? You can roll back. So you can basically go back, like I said. And that's one good thing about IAC, the fact that you can go forward and you can go backward, right? Sometimes you push a change, it's not working as expected, and then you can go back, right? So security, obviously, as with everything AWS, you can put in security, who can create a stack, who can delete the stack, who can do whatever, right? You can create all that. Cross region, cross account, you can also do that, which is where the benefit now lies in. So it means that, for example, you can stay in one account and more or less like deploy something to another account, right? All that would have been impossible if you were to do it manually. So those are just some of the benefits. So let's look. I can see this clearly, but I don't know if you can see it clearly. But this is talking about basically what does a CloudFormation template look like. Ideally, a CloudFormation template it's a JSON or YAML file. So those two, just take note of it. Either you're using JSON or you're using YAML, right? YAML is just it's just more or less like a very one of the things that are very very popular if you are dealing with in the cloud, right, or even in the development world. But it's basically key value pairs, right, for the most part. Just like you have JSON, it's just that YAML is a bit. I don't know which one I want to say is friendlier, but I mean you can pick any of them. So JSON is obviously JSON. Everyone knows JSON, right? And then there is obviously YAML that is, in a human readable, and in a concise format. So it's something you get from. I think most of us have seen it, right? But it's just that it's the language for CloudFormation. So you don't need to learn any special programming language. It's basically you're using JSON or you're using YAML. For the most part, people use YAML, right? So when you check the format is what I gave on the left. Basically, there is like a AWS template format version. All these things, as time goes on, you don't really need to cram them, right? You just need to understand the components that you need and how to add more to those components, right? But for the most part, you have like a template version that tells you which version you're working with. You give a description, which is also optional, that will tell you more or less like what's the stack doing, right? You have parameters to say what do I need? Do I need the CIDR from the user? Do I need the name of the VPC from the user? More or less like requirement gathering, right? So use parameters to gather requirement from the user. You can also use more or less like mappings, right? You can use mappings to more or less like use it to define, more variables that you can get, just so that you can standardize it, right? So you can have it in such a way that you have like mappings to say, okay, these are the values for prod, these are the values in dev, and then depending on when you're launching it in, it can pick the right value for you, right? So you're creating a mapping for some set of variables, right? And then resources is the only thing that is required for the most part, right? So even if you can choose not to choose, add like a parameter is optional, but you have to tell us which resource are you deploying, right? So in this case, it's a very simple resource that is there, S3 bucket. So there is just one resource there that is saying my S3 bucket. So it means if you wanted to create my S3 buckets with CloudFormation, you have this template, right? And there's also an optional output section, which means, okay, you've created this. Is there anything you want to output out? The reason is because in the real world, you have different stacks that you're using, right, in an account. And sometimes you want one stack to be able to reference value from another stack. And that's where you need an output, because I can finish provisioning. Maybe my only responsibility is to provision the VPC. I'll put all the things that has to do with the VPC, provision it, and then output the VPC ID, right? And then something else that is somewhere that needs the VPC will import the VPC and then use it in their own stack. It just brings up more or less like object. It's like it's a good way to arrange things, right? So that everything related to VPC can stay in one place, everything related to provision in the database can stay in one place, and then you can share more or less like resource, right, across stacks. Okay. YAML, like I mentioned, is more readable, and it's really what we use for the most part. Okay, for CloudFormation. What else do I want to show you? So stack itself is the meat of CloudFormation. A stack is really a group of resources that you're creating, so collection, and that has to launch as a single unit, right? So if, for example, like I said, you could, everything we went through to create a VPC, right? You have like a public subnet, a private subnet, so that can be a stack, a VPC stack, and it's good like that for you to arrange your resources in such a way that you can reason. It's good when you can reason about it just in one place, right? So more or less like in a VPC, you have everything related to creating a VPC. So the subnets, the NAT gateway, the internet, the NAT gateway, the internet gateway. You can have all that as part of a stack, right? And then just launch that. And then the resources in there, the resources in that stack are now the individual resource, right? So whether it's EC2 in this case, S3, RDS, whatever, all those AWS resources that we know can be resources in the stack, right? Logical ID is obviously unique identifier within the template. So you give them unique names. That becomes the logical ID, right, of that resource, right? There has to be like a unique identifier. And then there is like the physical ID. So when you think, although some of these things you see it from implementation, but again, when you launch an S3 bucket, there is now like the physical ID, which is the physical ID that was finally deployed, right? It's different from that, like the logical ID that is in stack. Okay. And then obviously there's like a life cycle that you can follow, create, obviously update. You can update a stack, right? Something was there before, you wanted to add something, and you can also delete a stack, right? Nested stacks is obviously the point is that you can have one stack make reference to another stack, and that's why I said in the real world you would have stacks that are specific for something. So you can have like a stack that's going to give you an RDS database, a stack that's going to give you a VPC, a stack that is going to you can just build them like that, right? And then share stacks output basically across board. Okay. So here I'm just doing more to talk about parameters, but honestly, we don't need to stress so much about it. It supports string. You could have like a number list. You could have like a number, like a list, comma delimited list. So you can have like basically it supports different kinds of parameters. The whole idea is that parameters are just inputs that you want to take for you to launch the stack, right? And then obviously there are other types like keep here that you can use, right? And then when you look at the description for a parameter, most times it has things like maybe you give it a description, you give it a default value, right? So if this person does not specify anything, what should I default to, right? And then you can also give like an allowed values to say, I'm only taking these two set of strings. If it gives me any other thing that is non part of these strings, I'm going to reject it, right? And then input methods, console API. So what it means is that you can have like you can more or less like have even methods within your stack that basically does other calls, right? Yeah, it's basically like I said, it has tight integration with a lot of AWS services, right? So parameters, you need them, especially if you want your environment to more or less like be unique, to be customizable. That's the whole idea. So you can get parameters from the end user and then use that to provision the stack, right? Based on the person's input. For example, for a VPC, so if you wanted to use a perfect example for this one, if you had like a VPC stack, what are the things that should come in as a parameter? You pretty much be asking the user, what side do you want this VPC to have, right? You could have something like how many subnets do you want this VPC to have? And maybe there's a logic that takes the CIDR and then breaks it to the number of subnets the person wants to have, right? But the person maybe doesn't need to be supplying all the CIDRs of the subnet. Maybe you just need the VPC CIDR, and from there you can use logic to break to create subnets from the values that were provided, right? So it's just why parameters are very powerful. They're really what makes your stack compact, and then you can use parameters to drive what is coming in. Okay. So, like I said, output is basically you're exporting. You're exporting from a stack. So if you have like a stack, you're exporting. So you've created an S3 bucket, right? And you want another stack to be able to see that S3 bucket. A good way for you to do it is basically export the value of the S3 bucket. So what it means is that another stack can make reference to it, right? It's just like you're sharing what you are building, right? So obviously, yeah, there are other things here that makes it so you can do more or less like you can have a description. Obviously, you give it a value, right? The value you're exporting, right? And then there is really like export itself that makes it more or less like external stacks that are within that your account can actually make reference to that variable. So it's very powerful, right? Such that you can basically reference a completely different stack from a completely different stack also. Just know that output and the export functionality helps you reach one stack, reach the values in one stack from another stack. Okay. Common use case, for example, like I said, if you created a VPC, you want that VPC ID to be used in many places, right? Sometimes you have like a database that needs to know which VPC am I going to be provisioned into, right? So maybe it needs the VPC ID. Maybe you can export the private subnet also and say, these are the private subnets. And it knows, oh, if I'm launching my RDS in this case, I need to use the private subnet, right? Your load balancer endpoints, you can output that. You can output even your database endpoint, right? So you don't need to go and be checking the stack to know what is what. You can basically just grab the what do you call it, the export from there, okay? And then you can use cross-stack reference to get those output out from one stack to the other, okay? And mappings, obviously, like I mentioned, you can create like a mapping. It's just like a lookup, like it's a lookup. So more or less like you can say, for example, you can create a mapping. So the example I have there, you can have like regional AMI mappings and say if this stack is being deployed in EU East 1, for example, use this AMI. So and then there is a logic that will say, oh, this is my region. Which AMI am I supposed to use? So you just go into the map, right, and fetch your own AMI. So there's a good example there, but the whole idea is just that you can actually use map to provide a set of information that you can use to more or less like find something from the map, right? So it's just like a key value store where you can but the good thing is that you can have it nested such that you can say, I mean, EU East 1, I want to get the AMI that I need because I'm in this region, right? So you can use mapping to do all that. For example, AMI IDs by region, instance type by environment. Maybe you have like instances that you have, and you can say for prod you can only use this instance. For dev you can use this instance. You can create a mapping for that, right? Configuration values by application tier if you wanted to keep that kind of thing, right? For the most part, you use find the map to fetch that value out. So in this case, I'm saying find the map, and I'm calling the region map, which is the map itself, right? The mapping that I created, and in there I'm saying give me the region, right? Okay, I'm using like my current region, and I'm fetching out the AMI from it. The thing is that once you start using it, it becomes very straightforward. CloudFormation there's not a lot in CloudFormation, right? It's just these building blocks that you would see as time goes on. But honestly, even at this stage, we're already like I'm saying much, right? But I just want to build that foundation so that in case you want to go read more on these things, you can, right? Yeah, obviously there are other options you can use. So you can use alternative methods like doing dynamic query of SSM, right? Get SSM variables or values inside your CloudFormation template. Okay. So that's just infrastructure as code at introducing CloudFormation, right? But it makes sense if you begin to see it in your account, what that would look like. So I'm just going to go to my account. I'm back to my normal account for this class. So I'm just going to look for CloudFormation. Like I said, CloudFormation is really not new to AWS. Okay, CloudFormation is native to AWS, but the concept of having infrastructure as code is not new to AWS. So it means that every cloud platform they probably have their tool that they use in doing it. And then also, just so you know, AWS CloudFormation is not the only IAC tool, right? There's Terraform. I do a lot Terraform, like every day. Terraform is like my day to day. But I've used CloudFormation extensively also, right? So it depends on what tool you find yourself using, right? But the concept is the same. It's just the fact that you're having a template that will create your infrastructure instead of doing it manually. That's really so there's no there's nothing special to say about it. Here basically you can see right now there is no stack, so I don't really have any stack, right? Like I said, you have to have like a stack if you want to build, like that's like the building block, and then in there you have resources, right? So here let me say new stack. Because ideally there are many ways you can basically like, it's a template. So in most cases it's either the template is already in S3 bucket, right? So you can upload from S3. You can do upload a template, right? You can just upload a template. You can sync from Git. So there are just many options here, right? So you can have like an S3 URL to bring it in. But in this case, because I already have a file that I want to paste, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Infrastructure Composer. But again, we're going to see what Infrastructure Composer is. I'm just going to use these because so I'm just going to go and create it in Infrastructure Composer. The reason I'm going this route is just because I want to paste it. I don't want to go through the stress of having to more or less like write upload the file or go through that stress, right? So I'm just going to use template. Ideally, in the diagram, we'll see what Infrastructure Composer is, but I'm just going to use, what do you call it? So I'm just going to use, Infrastructure Composer. I have a template that I have already. I'm just going to paste it here, and then I'll use it to pretty much just explain some of the things that we've already talked about, right? So it's here, I pasted it here. I'm going to validate it just to make sure it's valid. So that's a good thing, right? I just need to validate, right? Just to make sure there's no errors and all that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, it's not as clear as it's not as bold as I want it. Yeah, I'm looking at ways for me to extend this the view that I have right now. But while this is here, I'm just going to take out this part. Let me see. I'm looking for a way to more or less like okay, what I'm going to do is that no, that's not going to be possible. Can you guys still see my screen? Yes, I think you should be able to see my screen. So what I've basically done here is to just show, because they actually wanted to show it boldly, but it's not showing as much as I want. So I'm trying to see if I can actually bold this, okay, so that you guys can actually see the stack that I pasted, so that you see it. So if you see it here, it's exactly all the things that I've described. There is a version, there is a description, there is a parameter saying, which bucket name do you want to create. For example, we did give it a description. Default is if you don't provide any name, use this name. Environment, we are saying if you don't give me an environment, I'm going to use dev, but I need you to provide maybe dev or prod, right? And then there's pretty much a room here to say mappings, right? Which is exactly what I was talking about. So if it's dev, versioning is obviously suspended. If it's prod, maybe versioning should be enabled because prod is important. Also, there's condition to say it's production. Those are really advanced, more construct that you can see in CloudFormation. But the idea you can have like a conditional block that says it's production is when the environment is prod, right? And then you can create some resources based on if it's production, and then choose also not to create some resources if it's not production, right? So these are all just basic stuff. But the whole idea is that it's a template that is really signifying what your infrastructure should look like, okay? And in this case, the most important thing you should take out is really we're creating an S3 resource, right? Before we'll create it, just go into the manual, into the console to do it. But here, we just have a template that will create it for us. And then there's a bucket policy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bucket policy and I'm going to pretty much take it out, right? So I'm just going to leave that. There's an output section that is going to give us like the bucket name, right? So it means that we're going to more or less output the bucket name once we're done. The ARN, the bucket name is different from the ARN, right? So you can also output that. So I'm going to copy this template. So I'm going to copy. I just want to open this page so that you can see it clearly, right? But this is the same file I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to paste it back to where we're coming from. So that I'm going to take this back to where it came from, and then I'm going to paste this again here, and then I'm going to validate it again, okay? And then I'm just going to now create template. Actually, I can actually create a template from here, but again, I think I can also create a stack actually directly. Maybe it wants me to create a template. Yeah, I'll give it a bucket, confirm and continue to CloudFormation, because that way CloudFormation would need like a bucket for the resource to be. So it's obviously built from CloudFormation. This is where it is located right now. It has uploaded into this file, and then I'm going to do next, right? So the first thing is it wants me to provide a stack name. So I'll just call it my S3 simple stack, right? So really that's it. And then this is where the parameters become important, right? You see that there was a place where we said if you didn't provide parameter, default it to my demo bucket, right? So, but yeah, I can override that, right? So I can say this is the default, but no, that's not what I want. I want it to be my demo bucket TikTok, right? I can do that here. I can choose because I already have two values that I can only choose from. So dev or pro, right? So I'm going to keep it as broad, dev, and do next. Here, for the most part, I can choose an IAM role if there was something that I needed an IAM role for. But these are basically some complex, more or less like advanced stuff that we can talk about at some other time. But I don't really need it. I can just proceed, right? As with most resources, there are usually many other things that you can configure, right? But that's not the essence of this class. So I can just do submit. So one thing you will notice is that when I click submit, it's basically, so I need to go back to my stacks. One thing you notice is that here, if I go to, okay, it's doing view nested. Let me just, is it that my screen is too, okay, yeah, it's better now. I think it was too zoomed. So if I click on this, you see the stacks that are creating, right? Where is that again? Stacks. Okay, cool. If I go here and I create on stack, why is this? Oh, okay. I think this was just too elongated. But one thing you need to take note of is that here, my S3 simple stack, right? That's really what I call it. And it has created a stack. But one thing you need to know is that, yeah, obviously there are stack information that you can see, more or less like the ID of the stack. These things become very important at some point, right? But the whole idea is that you see the events, creating progress. It tells you exactly what it did. So it went through creating, and then at some point it was create complete. It just means the whatever resource I was creating has been completed, right? And then here you can see that this is resources now that tells you exactly what was provisioned. So if I click on this resource on the left side, we'll go back to it at some point, but or we can even try it now. So let's open it. Everything we're doing it's in US West 2, so the bucket was actually created. I think we've seen creating bucket before, right? We'll just go there and create bucket manually. But in this case, we're just using infrastructure as code to drive that process, right? So it's there. The resource is there. The physical ID, like I mentioned, is obviously the physical ID that was created. So this is really the bucket name, right? If you compare that to logical ID, the logical ID is really my S3 bucket, which is always going to be unique across the resource that you create, right? And then in the output section, for example, we did say we wanted to export the bucket ARN, right? So it means another stack can reference this, right? And see more or less like get the bucket ARN. So instead of them looking for it, they can just import it from this stack. Similarly, the bucket name, right? So you don't need to manually tell somebody this is the name of the bucket I create. They can actually fetch it themselves from another stack, right? Parameters, we can see the exact parameters that I used to create this bucket. I did expose a parameter section. So what it means is that I said bucket name, but the person was able to override. I was able to override it, and my bucket became my demo bucket TikTok, right? And then the environment is dev. You can look at the template. So here it's showing us the exact template that we used in creating it, right? But you can see the construct that I did mention at some point. So parameters, mappings, resource, output. Honestly, these have majorly the construct that you're going to be using. I think the only thing you start seeing is that you may now have more resources to create, right? And then change set is basically no change set. We'll talk about what a change set is. So what we just did right now, we created a stack and we applied it directly. It might work in many cases, like in dev. If this is dev, it's not a big deal. You can just do that. But in prod, you pretty much don't want to just create a stack and just launch everything at once, right? That's where change set comes in. Okay. There's obviously git sync here that I don't want to talk about now, but we can also more or less like remember we said create, update, delete, right? So the bucket is here, is obviously here. And if you go and check the properties, for example, and you scroll down to permissions, okay, let's go to permissions. There is no bucket. There is obviously no. There is also another resource that I actually, if you remember, I removed the resource from it before, right? So if you see right now, there is no bucket policy. So let's assume as part of the building process, we now want to add a bucket policy. You want to do it manually, right? Even if you do it manually, you still want to go back and edit the template and have that change located. Because sometimes truly, when you're working, maybe in dev, you're doing these things manually. You're doing them in man. But once you're done, this is the change. This is just like you created your VPC and you've done that. You're sure that this is the change. The next thing you want to do is to translate that to infrastructure as code, just to make sure it is now reproducible, right? Because that's the whole idea. So here, the stack is created, but we can more or less like create more versions of the stack. So if you go there, for example, we can, I think I saw an option just now that I wanted to see. So template is really what I wanted to go to. Remember, ideally, this is supposed to be a template you're uploading, but here I'm using Infrastructure Composer just to make that work easy for myself, okay? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to look at the template here. So I'm just using this to manually edit the template. So I'm going to open the template, it's here, and then I'm going to go back to the resources, and then I'm going to copy another part of the resource, okay? Which is more or less like, so I have S3 there. I'm just going to go one step back and then paste it here. So it's currently not aligned properly. So I'm just going to push this one a bit back. Right, good. So what am I doing? I had a bucket before, right? That was the first change. And this is exactly how we build in the real world. Like, it's not like everything is built once. Sometimes you're adding change based on what is happening. So this is just like a typical how it is built in the real world. We started with a bucket, and now we notice, oh, the bucket doesn't have a bucket policy. But you know what a bucket policy is. In this case, we're saying we need an additional bucket policy, and we've already added it. And what this guy is doing is that, although here the condition is that if it's in production, if this is happening in production, this is in fact, I'm going to take out this condition, right? So that because we deploy this stack with dev. So if I have that production, it's not going to show. So here I'm just saying either we create the bucket policy. So what I'm going to do is first I'll validate it just to make sure it's valid. It is. I'm going to update the template, confirm and continue to CloudFormation. So we're back again. In this case, we're not creating a new stack. We're basically updating a stack. Okay. So we'll do next. Like I said, I'll repeat it. I'm using Cloud Composer just to make it easy for me to edit directly. Ideally, you can upload a file. So this same template, if you have it, I can give it to you in your own account. You just upload it, or you can create yours and just upload it. The most important thing is you have all the CloudFormation goodies in it, right? Cool. So if I do next, so I'm leaving everything as is. I'm not going to touch anything. I just want the new resource that I added to be created. So I'm just going to submit. So what do you think is going to happen? There's going to be an update, right? Because when we created at first, it was creation. And now when we added a new change, it's going to be an update. without even doing anything here, I probably would just try and wait for a while, but I can see it's trying to create a bucket policy. Um, I'm going to give it some time to do its thing, but it's still creating, right? Um, it's still creating. But let me go back to the bucket and refresh to see in the permissions tab and see if anything is there. We definitely know the change, right? Even in the real world, you know that development, that's exactly how development happens, right? Um, you start, you basically start from, what do you call it? Um, yeah, I think this one, I may not, let me see. It's beginning to take time, but again, let's check CloudTrail. I don't think we talked about CloudTrail, but it's basically where you can see what's happening, right? Because I know in this case, it's trying to create a bucket policy. So I'm just going to refresh. It's obviously trying to create it. Maybe something is not working as expected somehow. So here it's trying to put, I think, bucket versioning was obviously created at some point. What is it doing here? Let's see. Um, block public access. Yeah, it's not really complaining though. There's really nothing that stands out. Maybe it's just a wait game or something. But it's taking too long. That's my point. Initiation, resource creation initiated. It's still there, but it's really not telling me what is happening. Like, um, put bucket policy. Okay, this is maybe it's just taking its time. Invoked by me, obviously, blah blah blah. But there's no error. There's no issue that says anything is going wrong. So maybe it's just a wait game. It said it has invalid resource. Let me see. Um, I can see more or less like what it's trying to do here. It's trying to do maybe it's doing this, right? So, and I think it's because if you look at this policy is actually correct. There's nothing wrong with this policy. Maybe it's looking at the resource and it wants it to be like a full ARN. So, which is what I'm trying to fix, but it looks like it's failing. Let me see if I will just wait and see. Yeah, it's going to take a while for it to resolve itself. What do we do now? Um, what do we do? Um, yeah, it's going to take a time. It's going to take time to create. I don't know if I can wait for it. I don't know if I can wait for it. Let's see. But the whole idea is that this is supposed to create a new stack. This is supposed to create a new stack. I'm just adding a bucket policy to it, right? It's just that this one is blocked. So I pretty much will see if I can do create new resource build from Cloud Composer. Um, and then I'm just going to copy the one I had before. Let me see. I'm just going to remove the bucket policy first. I'm going to take it out. I will take the bucket policy out first and then create do next. Okay, do next here. Create an infrastructure composer. Um, I'll do templates. I'm just going to paste it again. I think this is where we started from. I'm going to validate it, create a template, go to do next. Because this one is going to stay here. Usually, I think with time, you see what timeout is. Ideally, you will have like how long it's going to wait. You can set all that. So just like in Terraform, you can choose how long, enter a stack name. So my simple S3 stack, I don't know if this was the one name I used before, stack demo. The bucket name is TikTok1, right? So, and then dev is also going to be the environment name. I'm going to keep everything as is. I'm going to launch the stack again, right? The other thing is going to create a new bucket. So this one is here. I can't even delete it, neither can I update it. So let's just wait. So let's actually look for, so again, let's go back to these things. I'm going to paste this here. I'm just going to paste, sorry, I think I'm pasting the wrong thing, but I want to paste the this, right? The documentation, so that you know that everything is also online. So it pretty much means if you go to bucket policy, for example, it shows you everything that should be there. There is a bucket, there is a policy document. Um, there is really examples here, right? So in this case, you can see the resource. It's really the resource we were using. So this is an example in CloudFormation, right? Yeah, like I was mentioning, you see that this is missing, right? So the full ARN is missing. Um, yeah, so Let's see if the second one has created. So this one, rollback. This one, rollback is done. Let's go back and edit this one. So this is the one we wanted to update the stack, make a direct update, edit in Cloud Composer. Like I said, you can always upload a new file. Did I just say update in this? This is the one that is working, right? So template, view in Cloud Composer. And then I'm just going to do this, right? So I'm just going to do just give me a second. Yeah. So just exactly what we had for the okay, we wanted to introduce a bucket policy. So let me bring in the bucket policy in. So I'm just going to paste in the bucket policy. So it's here. I'm going to shift this one a bit back. Let me see, validate it, and then update the templates, and then continue in CloudFormation. Let's see. I think this one should work. Let's do next, next, and then next, and then next, submit. Okay. So it's going to bring us back to updates. It's creating a bucket policy. Let me go to CloudTrade again and see if there is anything new. Is this the new one or the old one? This probably is the old one. So let me wait. Let's see. This one. Let's refresh. So this one has completed. So the first one failed, right? So now update rollback is complete. We pretty much, I can get rid of this, but that's not the point. The point is that this one has created. And yeah, it's just one of those things you have to check out, because when you're trying to create resource, it's actually doing the same thing that you would have wanted to do in the UI, right? So in this case, if you check it, you can always go back to CloudTrail and see, what am I trying to do? Which policy am I trying to create? In this case, I know it's trying to create a resource. It's using the bucket /star and it's not working. But if you go back to the one that works, for example, if you go bucket policy, you see that that one uses I'm not even seeing that event now here, but let's go back to the bucket and refresh and see what we got. Is this the bucket? I think it's the second bucket, right? We created a new one, so it's TikTok one. So we'll just go to permissions, right? And then check, yeah, bucket policy, right? So it's here. So that's the whole idea. The thing is that we went from just having a bucket to adding a bucket policy to it, and that brought us here, right? And the thing is that, so it wasn't one change that we pushed once. We basically starting from a small template, right? Started from here. We added more resource to it, right? And then push that out. But you can continue to extend this, right? You can also create it just create it once, or you can also continue to more or less like update the stack, right? So once you have your stack, it's updated, it's complete, and you don't have any need to do with it again, you can delete it, right? So deleting is just going to delete the resource. And that's why we said there is create, there is update, and there is delete. So in this case too, I will delete it, right? So the good thing about it is that if you do all that, your buckets will be deleted without you doing anything, right? Those buckets are gone. These are things that we should have done if we were doing it using more or less like manually, right? You go to the console, you create it yourself, but here you are just doing it from the UI and it is creating for you, okay? So that's basically it. So we've seen more or less like the create, the update, and the delete process. So we can actually go back to the slide. I think, yeah, there was just this minor issue in the template. The one that really worked at the end of the day, if you check the template, it had get attributes, just so that you can get the full ARN. Like I said, many of these are all constructs that you get to see at some point, you get used to. And again, I also mentioned that this is CloudFormation, right? But IAC is not only CloudFormation. There are other tools that you can use to do CloudFormation, that you can use to do IAC, right? CloudFormation is just one of it. And what it means is that as part of your using it, you have to understand some of these some of these things that are here, all right? Get attributes in this case, we are doing like the bucket itself, and we're getting the ARN. And the first resource, the first one that was wrong, we're using the bucket name, and that's why it won't work, right? But fixing this to getting the ARN will got us sorted, okay? And then we've seen all the building blocks that are there, which works for us. So I think we've shown the mappings itself. We've seen so that brings us to infrastructure composer, right? So I've shown you infrastructure composer without also showing you, right? But the whole idea is a visual CloudFormation template designer, right? So the thing is that you can do drag and drop. That's what's the difference. Here I was working from a template, but you can as well go and do visual drag and drop. I'm not very used to doing that, but there is that option. So if it's good for prototyping, you just want to try, and we'll see what that looks like. So real-time template generation integrated with CloudFormation console. We could see how we're moving from both infrastructure composer back to the CloudFormation console, right? So relationship visualization, that's the whole idea. You can actually, because you are dragging and dropping, you can visualize your template, right? You can validate your template. We have used that. You saw it. I was doing validation also. And direct deployment capability, meaning from Cloud Composer, you can just more or less like deploy your template, right? So use case is really prototyping. I don't think in the real world you use infrastructure composer for most things, right? Like especially for like production workloads and all that. But it's good for prototyping. Maybe you want to just see architecture at a glance, right? So if you look at where we're coming from, we didn't really use infrastructure composer, but if you we used it, but not like using it for the prototyping. So the whole idea is that if you go there, it's basically a canvas. So you can come like what we were doing before. If you wanted an S3 bucket, you just drag and drop. That's just what it means, right? You can pretty much just continue to drag resource, continue to create connections, between one resource to the other, right? For you to create. So in this case now, for example, I can call it's my bucket. Let me see if there is like what else can go with the bucket. I'm not sure in this case. So there's like a bucket policy. Yeah, there's like a bucket policy. For example, maybe you can drag and drop. I think you can actually connect these things together. Sorry, still moving, trying to get connected. Uh, so there's a bucket policy here. Interesting. But if I go to the template, yeah, it's making reference to the bucket, and then maybe I don't even know what is wrong at this point. But if I validate it, I know it's validated, and if I create the template and I continue, let's see what it creates. Maybe it's just a UI. I'm not sure whether it's a UI glitch at this point. But the whole idea is just that you can actually from Composer, right? So, but again, if you know the stack itself, if you know, never seen this AWS UI. So if you know what exactly is creating the stack, you can actually just do it. It's still going to do exactly what we did before, right? So it's going to create the resource. It's creating a bucket. So from from Composer buckets, creating is in progress. Not even sure what's the name of the bucket it's trying to create now. Let me see what the bucket is, but let's see. But the whole idea is that if you are somebody who is graphic inclined, you can go there and yeah, it has created a bucket here, right? So it's created a bucket. So that is working fine. So let's refresh and see bucket has been created. The bucket policy was also created. So that same thing that I uploaded the template for is the same thing we were able to create with just diagramming, right? So you can get comfortable with the tool and learn to see how. But ideally, you should go the cloud like the code approach first, right? Because like I said, in the real world, you won't be using infrastructure composer, but it's good for prototyping. You can just go there and use it to more or less like do modeling, right? If you wanted to model stuff, what you can see, it created this, right? It created this bucket policy. So if you're interested, you want to just go there and play around the tooling, you can always go there and do all that. Okay. So two things: it's either you do it manually or you go to infrastructure composer and you're just there. But in the real world, you have to learn CloudFormation. That's just the thing, because that's just exactly how I know that. If, for example, when I went to the infrastructure, if I open this in infrastructure composer, for example, so if I go to template and I view in infrastructure composer, although it was composed from there, but at some point I knew something wasn't working right. So even though in the UI it doesn't really show the bucket policy, right? But it was applied. So for some reason, I'm not entirely sure how I did that magic. And I was trying to create the connection. I didn't really see it, right? But if you go, for me, I can still look at this code and I can tell what it's doing. And that's why that's why I always encourage you to understand the code itself. Sometimes some of these things you will not be writing the code, right? It's either you are pretty much in the UI modeling, or you also, if you were in the ID, maybe you're also generating. But you first need to start understanding what is CloudFormation, what are the entities in, and which is some of the ones that I've introduced to you, right? So in this case, you can notice that only a resource section was created, just two resources. There was no parameter, there was no output. The other one I gave had more of the examples, but here there was not that. There was no parameter, there was no mapping, there was no output section. There were just two resources, right? But the whole idea is that you can't do it from the canvas. And in AWS, there are many things you can do from like just UI, not just infrastructure as code. There are so many things. So if you, for example, you've seen how we've done CloudFront before, like I was mentioning, you can drag a CloudFront distribution here, connect it to the bucket. But in the real world, I don't see how that's going to work. And most times, if you just want to prototype. So, but it's good, it's a tool. In case you're this kind of UI visual person, why not? You can also use it and use it to push yourself forward. And just, it's a service. It's there. Like with most AWS service. Like I said, in the real world, some services you use them barely, right? And then some services you use them more. But you just know the fact that you know that it's there means that you can always go back there and use them whenever you want to, right? More or less like a reference point. So one thing we didn't really see, right? One thing we didn't really we didn't check was we didn't really check. We didn't do more or less like a change set, right? So everything we've just been doing, we'll just create it and we'll apply it. But in the real world, it doesn't work that way, because ideally, like for production, you don't just want your template to just be overriding everything. Ideally, what you do is that every new template becomes a change set. And that change set, you can actually decide if it's going to go or you're not going to allow it. So you create a change set, and then that change set, you're going to apply it. Okay? Those are advanced topic, but just know that it's there. Because right now, what we've been doing, we just carry a template, we change it, carry a template, we change it. But in the real world, you create a change set, meaning I'm trying to introduce this change. And then you can choose if you want the change to go through or not. Okay, so preview changes before execution. You can review resource additions, modifications. You can see all those things, whatever is going to happen. If resource is going to be added or deleted, you see all those things, right? Execute or delete change set. Useful for production environment, like I mentioned. You don't want to just apply everything. Sometimes it's good for you to see what is being created, what is being deleted, or what is being modified, right? You can also use it to see drift, to see when what you have, there is like a drift, something that's more or less like, especially something has changed. Like if, for example, there was you had a bucket and someone changed it manually, right? That's like a drift because it has now changed from what is in template, right? Change set can help you discover those things. Okay. Again, you can also use that to compare what is actual versus what is expected. So that's why a change set is very, very important. It actually helps you see, and then helps you maintain your compliance, right? You don't just want any change to go in. You need to go. Like I said, IEC helps with auditing. You can actually see what is coming in, and if you're a senior person, you can say, oh, this thing might cause issues, and you can stop it, right? Because again, you can see all those things. Stack policies, obviously, yeah, every stack that we created it easily, but in the real world, you could have policies that would say who can create what. You can say you can create this resource, right? Policy, we've seen what a policy is. Similarly, you can have that for a stack, right? So it means that you can say this person cannot delete anything from a stack. This person can do, right? So you can use that to create permission boundaries. So especially when you have like critical resources that you're provisioning, and you don't want anybody to just be able to tear down the stack. We saw how we tear down, and immediately the bucket was deleted, right? So it means that those things are powerful, and you don't want just everyone just to be able to do that. Okay, it's basically policies that we know, right? So deny or allow, yeah, we've done policies already. So there's not much I want to say there, but the use case is really protect your production database, for example, preventing an accidental deletion, governance or compliance requirements, whatever that is. Okay. And stack set is something that is in the UI that is obviously also advanced, but just know that stack set is basically what I did just now was deploying to one account, but there is also possibility that you can from one account deploy to all the other to multiple accounts, right? And then you can choose more or less like how you want to go about that deployment. That's just the point. And what you saw me do was in one account, but you can have that same stack deploy them across multiple accounts. So if you have like 10 accounts that you want them to have the same change, you can be in one account and then push all those changes to all those sub accounts, right? With the help of a stack set. Centralized management from an administrator account. So there's an account that's like administrative, and then you can use that to push change. But the whole thing is that you're trying to make it reproducible, right? You have it already. Why should you have to now move it to other places, do it in other places manually? You can actually just push it back there, right? It helps, especially when you start doing, we never started talking about organizations, because in the ideal world, the way AWS accounts work in production is that most accounts are inside an organization, right? So there's like an organization, accounts are inside that organization, and then you can actually do centralized management. One of it is stack set. You can use a stack set to do centralized management and manage other accounts by provisioning stacks into those places that will do certain things. So if you wanted all your account to have like an IAM role, you can use stack set to push it down. So some of these things are basically, they're a bit advanced beyond this class, but I'm just introducing the concept to you so that you know it's a thing that is there, just so that I can more or less like be opening your mind to the possibility. And it's not just these also, it's just CloudFormation makes it easy, but there are also some other, like in AWS, this is really one of the ways you can get it done, where from one account, you can push same stack to different accounts, right? So for example, you have like an IAM role that you want to have in 10 accounts, right? You don't want to be manually going to those accounts to be launching the stack. You can create the stack in one place. You can create a stack set that deploys it, to all the accounts. Okay. Security baseline, for example, you wanted a baseline across your organization. You can have that. Compliance policies. If you have like a compliance you wanted to roll out, you can use a stack set to roll it out. And then you can standardize infrastructure patterns, right? If something is done in one place and you want it to be standardized across other place, you can push it up, right? But you can do that. You will obviously do that within an organization setup, and that's why I said it's high level, right? It's basically high level. And then we've seen how we could do this in using YAML or JSON, right? But not everyone loves to do that. Some people are just coders. They just want to be in the ID and do stuff, right? That's why there's AWS CDK. The whole idea is a cloud development kit for infrastructure as code. CloudFormation is there for you to create YAML file directly, but what do you call it? Infrastructure as code is also there. AWS CDK is also there for you to, if you are a coder, you really want to do your thing as code, you can create your code, and then you can use that to generate your same YAML templates that we've just seen, right? So define infrastructure using familiar programming languages. So the same programming languages you already use, you can use it to still write your infrastructure, right? High level of abstraction is obviously one thing you can enjoy some abstraction that is already there, right? So you don't need to create all those things. There's some things you don't need to create from scratch because those abstractions have already been created for you in the form of constructs, right? It compiles to CloudFormation template. That's the most important thing. So the template that we saw just now, right? If you have to be writing that, it's going to be painful, right? So what people do is that you write it with your code, whether it's Python, JavaScript, and then it's going to translate to YAML, right? At the end of the day. Built-in best practice, obviously, right? Especially if you use existing constructs, there's a lot of best practice you can inherit. Rich ecosystem of reusable components. That's the whole idea. You can have components that you can use. Either you are the one authoring or someone else authors it, but there's always room for reusability, which is something you have to get used to, like in the coding world, right? Developer friendly, like I mentioned. So it's different from what we're doing in the UI, where we're doing like drag and drop. That's if you're a visual person, right? But most developers spend their time, even cloud engineers spend their time in the IDE. So it's just a way for you to use the same languages that you love, but be writing infrastructure as code, right? So when you think about the difference is obviously obvious. One is declarative, meaning JSON or YAML, right? So you're just creating that direct resource and everything. And the other one, you're just writing it in the form of code, right? So if you look at both, you know which one will be more powerful, right? You obviously can do more with CDK because now you can, it's like program, you can bring all the things you love in programming, you can embed it into your cloud, your CDK, and then all that will just be generating YAML template for you. Okay, so you can see that as you grow in this journey, there are so many ways to do things, and that's why you see that it depends on where you work, the experience you have, but you need to know all these tools. It just now depends on where you gravitate towards at the end of the day. Sometimes you learn these things, sometimes you might not even use them, depending on where you find yourself doing most of these things, right? But these options are always there, just in case whatever workflow supports you the most, right? If you are a programmer and you're in your own case, you just prefer to write a program that will generate templates, why not? If you also want to just do the template yourself, why not use CloudFormation and also do that? And again, if you're also like a visual person, you can go to the infrastructure composer and just drag and drop things, right? But we've seen that is majorly for prototyping, okay? Choose CDK for complex logic, right? Developer team. So it's really developer focused, all right? So that's really at the height of it. Supported programming languages are here: TypeScript, Python, C#, Java, Go, JavaScript. So if you currently are on this page, you know any of these programming languages, you're good to go. So it means you can write, you just need to now understand AWS CDK in addition to your programming language, and you're good to go. So you can generate all the same thing that I was doing just now in CloudFormation and just do it in your own programming language, okay? So I don't need to go into details. This is basically just the programming languages that it supports, and if you're already using any of them, it will be familiar. So in this case, I'm just going to, yeah, I'm not sure how easy it's going to be for me to demo this right now. Let me see. This one, for example, let's just go through these steps. So I'm going to take this a bit. I'm just going to go here. I actually want us to finish this CloudFormation class in this class, so it might be longer than expected, right? So what I'm just going to do is that I'm just going to go to Cloud Shell. I'm still in my account, so I'll do Cloud Shell. Okay, I'll go to Cloud Shell. I'll go here. So I'm going to use things that I have already have in the slide. Okay, so I'm just going to use the things that I have in the slide. But the whole idea is just to show you what is really CDK, right? How do you use it? But again, it's just exactly what I've explained. The fact that you're just writing programming, right? You're doing coding, but it's going to generate a template at the end of the day. The template is the most important. Is what we saw. That's what CloudFormation understands. We're only using this code to more or less like bootstrap that process. Okay. So if I go back to the slide, I'm just going to use this. So basically, the first thing you need to do is you need to just do a set of installation. So here I'm just going to be doing this. Obviously, I'm installing the AWS CDK, right? Because yeah, you have to basically install, right? So once I have that running, I will just do, I'm creating a directory. Don't worry about so I'm creating a directory here, make directory S3 CDK, blah, blah, blah. I'm just creating a directory. And then I'm going inside the directory. So I'm changing directory to that place. And the next thing I'm basically doing is I'm doing like an init, right? In this case, I'm choosing my language. I showed you in the other page that there are so many languages you can use. In this case, I'm obviously a Python developer. So I'm going to choose Python. So I'm just doing initialization. It's going to create a virtual environment, install dependencies. So let's just give it some time, okay? So we'll wait for a bit for it to happen. And yeah, so it's all done. Yeah, it's done. We're back there. So now what I'm just going to do is that, yeah, if you're familiar with Python, this is just creating a .m file and creating an environment. I'm just going to activate the environment. So like I said, some of these things are things that I can skip because I feel so I'm just installing. I'm just installing the requirements that I have. And then what I'm just going to do here is step 2 is basically I'm going to create a file. So I'm going to create a file. So what I'm going to do is what file am I creating now? Okay, so I'm just going to create an app file. I'm just going to create app.py. Okay, sorry. I'm just going to create an app.py file, right? We're still in Python. We're still doing Python, right? Oh, I think I already have a. Let me just exit. So I'm just going to remove app.py, right? So I'm just going to nano app.py. In this case, I'm just going to paste, right? So the whole idea is that, right? We said it's Python. So if you look at it, we're basically importing. We're importing app. We're importing a stack. We're importing a remove policy. I mean, we're just importing some bunch of stuff from the CDK library, right? If you're a developer, this will sound familiar. It's just that if you're not a developer, you may not like this, right? But you have to get comfortable with some of these things, especially if you're going into the cloud world. Like I said, this is CDK, CloudFormation, but this is not the only way people do IAC, just so you know, okay? And here we're just creating an S3 stack, and then, that's pretty much what we're doing. So I'm just going to exit, and then I'm just going to save, okay? So it's there. So what's the next instruction? So we've created our file. The next thing we want to do is basically do, before we deploy, let's just do a CDK synth, okay? So we'll do synth, because we're already in that directory, right? We're already in that directory. So let's just do a CDK synth. Yeah. So we've just done a CDK synth. A CDK synth is just going to take the Python, the code that you've written. Remember, this is code in this case. CDK is basically code. You're doing code here. So I'm just going to do CDK synth. But if really you want to see what is coming there from CDK synth, I'm just going to put it in a template. So I'll do CDK synth and pipe that into a template, right? So once it's back inside a template, and I'm now going to show you what that template is. So if I do cat templates.yaml and then I open it, if I scroll up a bit, you just see that there's a bunch of many things in there, right? But the most important thing is that it still goes back to what we are doing, right? We are creating. If you check, the most important thing is like a resource is going to be created, right? And then there's also here another resource that is more or less like a bucket policy, right? Which is standard stuff. We saw how we did that in a template, and we also saw how we did that with Infrastructure Composer. This is another way of doing it. It's not like there's no magic in it. So that's going to create a template. And the next thing we need to just do is basically to bootstrap. So bootstrap this environment, right? So we'll just do CDK bootstrap. I just want to show you like CDK itself in action, just a little action of it. It's not like we're going. So bootstrapping in this case, we're just trying to bootstrap the environment to make sure that it will create all the necessary tools that AWS needs to do whatever it has to do, right? So let's see, unable to resolve AWS account to use. Okay, so guys, if you remember, if you were on the call, this was the issue we're having, but we realized that it wasn't from anything we were doing. It was basically a fault from AWS. It looks like the latest CDK version is broken. So I think we'll just have to do this example with a CDK version that we know that works, okay? So what we're going to do is to I'm going to exit this setup. So I'm just going to exit this setup, the one that I have right now. I think I did close Cloud Shell here, but I don't want to close Cloud Shell. I just want to exit that setup. So I'm going to do ls. So I'm just going to remove whatever I created before. So I'm going to remove it. So it's gone. So what it means is that the first thing I really want to do is to install a CDK version that we know works, right? Latest does not work. So we'll install this one. So the one is 2.999.1, right? So once we have that, then we can go back to our steps and just go through. Okay, so it means I have to copy this command and replace the command we have just to make sure that you don't try it in. Who knows, maybe at the time you're trying this, maybe it's been resolved already, right? So, but we're just going to keep this here, and then we are going to do this one. So we'll make a directory, and we'll go into the directory, and then we'll just init a Python CDK app. Okay, so we'll just do this. Remember, at this point, we're already using a CDK version that works. So it's creating a virtual environment for us. So if I ls, obviously there is like a requirement.txt file. This is just the starting one, but you can always increase, like you can add more requirements. There's a dev requirement file and all that. So what I'm just only going to do is I'm going to remove this app .py and then create my own, right? So app.py and then paste the example that I have. So the example is here. I'm just going to paste this example. I'll paste it, and then I'll Control X and do yes and save. So now that I have it, I'm just going to go with the next step. So the next step is really CDK synth, right? So I'm going to do CDK synth. So that's going to synthesize the what did it say? No module AWS CDK. Okay, that's true because I've not installed. So I should do pip install requirements of txt. So let's see. Yeah, it's installing. So I think I did miss that step. So I need to update this to be after all these. After installing, you have to do pip install requirements.txt. Okay, so that's really it. So once it's installed, then I'll go back again to synthesize the app and see what we get. So let's wait for it to synthesize. Yeah, so it's done. So once it's done, I think the other ones is you can save it into a template, for example, if you wanted. So it's just the next step we have there. So there is this part where you can synthesize and save into a template. Yeah, so if you check the content of that template, let's say less of templates, the YAML, you're going to see that, yeah, it did create like a resource table, like a CloudFormation template that has, a simple bucket. It's going to create a bucket policy. So we're good. We're actually good at this point. So with that, I think the next step we actually were trying to do was to do CDK bootstrap, right? So we're just going to take this command and try to execute it. So we're going to do CDK bootstrap. Let's see. So yeah, it's bootstrapping. The only thing you will notice about the bootstrapping is the fact that if you go to CloudFormation, it's basically going to create a, what do you call it? So if you go to CloudFormation, the stack is creating. This is really where it's going to. So this stack includes resources needed to deploy AWS CDK apps into your environment, right? So this is the guy behind the scene that does everything for us. So let's wait for it to CDK, let it finish its thing. So we're just waiting for that stack to be created. But again, you already have been introduced to CloudFormation. So at this point, you can basically see what it is. It's creating some set of resources. If you check the templates, pretty much it's using many of the things we've talked about, like, right? So parameters, yeah, some resources is being created. If you scroll down, it's creating an IAM role, obviously doing some things. Yeah, bunch of roles, policies, and all that. But that's really not that's not our problem. Let it finish its thing, and once it's done, I think we're in this shell, so it looks like it's done, right? So the next thing, the command here is really to do CDK deploy. Okay, so we're just going to do a CDK deploy because once the once the bootstrap has happened, it means you can basically deploy, right? So here, this is really the change sets, more or less like that I was trying to tell you about, right? So here you can see it's trying to tell you the things it's going to create, the kind of resource. So you can see that yeah, more or less like IAM changes, potential sensitive changes. Just telling us. In this case, I think it's just telling you some of the things it's going to create, policies and all that. If we do yes, what's going to happen? So it's going to create a stack, basically from the Python application that we did put there. So if you go back to CloudFormation, a stack should have, yeah, if I refresh, there'll be a new stack. So this is the S3 stack that is now being created. So it's being created. It has an S3 resource. It has a bucket policy that is creating. It has also, some good stuff basically from the code, right? The whole idea is that we didn't really need to do much. We didn't need to create a template for this. We just wrote what we wanted. Everything that you're seeing here being provisioned was brought about by just this small set of code, right? So it depends. If you are a developer, most people prefer AWS CDK. Some people just prefer the YAML part of it, and some people even use their own tool like Terraform and so you can see it's here. And the resource has been created. If you check, obviously there are things that have been created on our behalf. So this is a simple bucket. This is like a resource that is there. So this is the resource that was created for us. It did create some other things. If I go to permissions, for example, it did create this bucket policy, and they were all in the stack, right? So if you're done, for example, and you're done, maybe you don't want the resource again, you can basically do CDK destroy, right? It's the same way like we were doing where we're terminating the stack, right? But instead of you doing it manually now, it means that you can basically write code that pushes things into your environment. You can also have code that terminates things from your environment. So so he's saying, are you sure you want to delete? I will say yes, right? That's the point. We did create it, and now we're deleting it. So if I go back, you also see staff deletion in progress. So you see the deletion is in progress. We're just going to wait for it to finish deleting. And once it's deleted, then it's all good. We're good to go. Yeah, so let's give it time and see what happens. It's gone. It's gone. It's deleted. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's CDK in a nutshell. You can do these things via code, right? So but we did reach a roadblock at some point, not from fault of our own, but because there was something wrong with the AWS CLI. And best practice template organization. So best practice template organization, obviously, that's going to be one of the big things you'll be doing, whether it's code-wise or the template itself. You're going to be thinking about how you want your infrastructure to be more or less like modular and organized. Like you want to organize things, right, across board as time goes on. So consistent naming convention, that's where naming convention becomes important. If you're doing it as a single person, like just you, if you start working in a team, you now be seeing that there are conventions that you can go with and how to go about these things, okay? And then security, least privilege option, obviously. And we've seen what that is. Just make sure that whatever role you're given, in this case, we didn't use any IAM role, but sometimes even a staff is creating a role, right? You just need to make sure that you're tying down the policies as much as possible just to make sure that you're not being over permissive, right? And you can store sensitive data. We've not talked about systems manager yet, but we'll talk about it. But you don't need to put sensitive data in your stack. You can pretty much put it in systems manager and have that more or less like, and have that be read from the CloudFormation template, right? Operations, version control, obviously Git is where that will come in, right? So in the real world, there's Git, and then all these things happen in Git. There will be different versions, master branch, dev branch, and then you can also deploy them based on that, right? Change sets, I've talked about it for production. You create a change, and then you decide if you want the change to go in or not, okay? And then, yeah, automated testing of templates. If there's like an automation process you can even launch those templates in an environment and then promote it later, right? So benefits, technical benefits, team benefits, they're all there. These are all just these if you wanted to read more. But yeah, benefits, we've seen it, faster time to market. Because you can, especially now where there is a lot of code generation that is going on here now, it's easy for you to just generate templates, right? Instead of you going and doing ClickUps, right? So technical benefit, also the fact that the version control is there, it means that you can predict your environment, right? And not tear things down unexpectedly. And team benefit, that's where collaboration comes in, because if both of us are working on a project, it's only infrastructure as code that makes that possible, right? Instead of you're deploying your console, I'm doing in my console, there'll be so much confusion. But if we have like a space we are working from, it becomes very easy, right? So what's the summary? We've seen infrastructure as code. Terraform is an option. There are many options that are out there, but in AWS, there's really CloudFormation that does it. CDK is really code-wise. If you wanted to do it using your existing programming languages, whether it's Python, JavaScript, TypeScript, you have modules that you can import to do whatever you want to do. Infrastructure Composer is there if you are this UI person that likes to do UI things. It's there. You can go do ClickUps and get it done, right? And then what is it? It's really the fundamentals. It's the core. It's core of DevOps. There's no way you tell me you do DevOps or cloud operations that you're not using IAC. So please, you have to learn one IAC tool, right? Whether it's CloudFormation or whether it's Terraform, whatever it is, but you need to know one at least one IAC tool so that it just helps it helps you go through your cloud journey easily, right? Because once you do it in the console, the next thing that is expected is you need to put it in the template, right? And then use that template to launch whatever you're doing. But it's easy once you get your hands of it. Yeah, that's it.